Gorgeous listeners, welcome to this week's episode. Today is a little bit of a privilege. I have a very dear friend called Jackie Lewis, who many of you will know has featured on the podcast herself and is one of those souls that I have the gift and the beauty of dancing through life alongside. Those of you that have listened to her episode or been a part of her meditation teacher trainings or received her gift in any way will know that she is someone who speaks with honesty and integrity and a real salty acceptance of the rough and the smooth and the light and the dark of life. And straight after our recording, I asked her who of the people that she knows, she's been doing this spiritual trudging and living for a long time. I said, who of the people that you know do you think would be a perfect fit? And she named me two people, and I have had the gift that these two people are forming part of our season, which is such a special privilege. And today I'm sitting in front of Mutribo, who, as I started to do my research, I found a lot of different words: meditation teacher, spiritual guide, published author. What I wanted to introduce him with actually were his own words as we decided whether he would come and feature on the broadcast. And there was one particular passage that Mutribo wrote to my very wonderful PA, which feels as though it encapsulates quite a lot of what I have discovered about him so far. And I know that we are going to discover all together, the listeners, him and I. So Mutribo writes, I live a very simple and quiet life, interspersed with offering guidance, help, and hopefully inspiration to anyone who crosses my life with questions around their spiritual seeking and is sincerely interested in finding their own way back home to our common reality. I share whatever has become clear to me with words, with meditation, and with silence. And so I wanted to start actually, as Mutribo often does, in a little touch of silence together. So as you listen, and as you allow the sound of our voices or the image of our faces on screen to slowly disappear, take a moment with yourself and with this lived experience that you are, in many senses, in the thicket of. And we're going to rest and be here together just for a little time. And I'll let you know when it's time to come back. And so very gently, dear ones, just letting yourself know that in a moment there will be the opportunity to come back into the fold. Just a little brief morsel of quiet. And just take your time. Emerging slowly back into the world. And feeling perhaps for what you notice, what you become aware of. The difference. We might say who it is that then comes back into shared space. And if that wasn't nearly long enough in intimacy, then just pause the recording and take yourself back in. And what we'll do is still invite Mutribo when he's ready. It's so lovely to have you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me, Anthea, and thank you for starting a session like that, it's always a beautiful way to start.
I suppose that's my first question for you, really, is what happens for you when you go into meditation, perhaps what it is about that discipline that has clearly called to you so strongly for such a significant portion of your life.
Yeah, I think if I go back, the initial inspiration for meditation was Osho and my time with Osho. He was very insistent that that was the way back home, the technique that basically directed you without anyone else's interference or the need of anyone else's help back inside to the deepest core of your being. So it started there, and over the years, just went into a deeper and deeper place with me. I did do very long, silent isolation retreats in the Himalayas, which I think was a time where it really grounded in me. And these days, what I find in meditation is everything. There's no longer any resistance to whatever is the case when I close my eyes. And for me, that's the core secret of meditation, of just being able to be with yourself and be with whatever you find when you look inside yourself. It's really no more complicated than that. And then there are various different phases of meditative experience and different spaces that people go into. And some of them are very beautiful. Some of them are very frustrating. Some of them are very painful. But overall, I think the direction of travel, as I know meditation, is towards what I would call a disappearance. And what I mean by that is not that you die or your body disappears, but that you move into a place inside yourself where you start to be the truth of your situation, the truth of your being. And that one word to describe that space is disappearance. And what that really means for me is that you've gone beyond a sense of separation that has ruled your life up to now in terms of a separate identity that thinks he or she is invested with personal doership and free will, and discovered something deeper behind that that allows you to experience and see and come to live through the fact that you have never lived your life. Life has always been living you.
There's so many threads from what you've just shared. I noticed myself feeling very moved actually as I listened to you. Partly because when you're talking about separation, which let's say in the way that you're describing it is the illusion rather than the reality, we make it a reality, but it isn't necessarily the base state for humans or the base state for humans in relation to the wider universe around them. When I think about what so many people are experiencing, I could say in the world now, but also it's always been the case. That separation and that resistance, you started what you just shared by saying that meditation is the capacity increasingly over time to just be with whatever is here. That brought resistance to my mind immediately, not just resistance to meditation, resistance to the medicine, we could say, resistance to the longevity of the practice needed to get to that place of dissolving and disappearance, but also resistance to ourselves as we understand them to be. This is not acceptable to me. No, I will not have this. I know from even a physical perspective how intense that resistance can feel and how painful it can feel. I'd love if you're willing for you to just touch on resistance because it's something that the listeners are so intimately familiar with. You could argue that even us choosing to listen to a podcast like this is partly the spiritual journey, but it's also partly there is a desire to, on some level, escape this experience that I'm currently in.
Yeah, resistance is pain, isn't it? Basically, any time we find ourselves resisting anything, we're in suffering. And it's part of being an identified human with a narrative of separation. Basically, all suffering only ever happens to a person, a separate person. Whenever any of us have been rooted in the experience of the present, and that might have been in making love or in watching a beautiful sunset or being intensely absorbed with a particular work or hanging out with people that you love, what we know in from that space, that all of us know, there isn't a human being who doesn't know that space. He or she may not have noticed it or registered it, but he or she will be familiar with it. That is a space of the present moment. And in the present moment, there's nothing left of you if you pay attention to you in the present moment. There is simply a functioning body-mind organism that is spontaneously responding to whatever the context is that surrounds it, whatever the events are that are in front of it. And of course, what is the biggest obstacle to that refuge, the only refuge for all of us, is being able to live in the present, because it's the only place where there's never any concern. And the biggest obstacle comes from this misidentification with the speck of consciousness that each of us has been animated by, this misidentification with this narrative of being a separate doer. That's the fundamental building block of all suffering. Now, when I talk about suffering, I'm not meaning moment to moment experiences of pain. Buddha, all the mystics, would have still stubbed their foot, would have still burnt their hand, might have still been upset by the behavior of one of their disciples. So what's the difference? What's the difference between Buddha, who seems to be still engaged in this human experience, and the ordinary person? And that difference lies in the relationship Buddha has understood between the reality, the deepest reality is that he is in this manifestation, the witnessing state, and the body-mind organism. And so there's no longer any need for Buddha or any mystic to take possession of any actions that he witnesses happening through this vehicle of consciousness, this vehicle of God. Basically, each of us is attached to a particular body-mind organism that is a vehicle, a programmed vehicle of God with a destiny. And the difficulty comes in when we decide, no, I don't want that, or I really want that. And that's where all the trouble starts. It's that interference of this narrative that has been built up. And I always point out, this ego structure started around 2 years old in each of us. And it was started and given birth by the people who loved us the most, by our parents or the people who cared for us when we were small. And the reason they did it was so that we could be prepared to survive in our relation with the world, with the manifestation and the other. And so its origins aren't nefarious or evil. They were simply helped to be put in place by people who loved us and wanted to protect us. But as we grow, as we mature, that then becomes something that starts to take on a little bit of a darker hue when we attach all of the emotions we attach around being successful or being a failure. So that's the basis. That separate person is the basis of resistance, is the basis of all human suffering.
It's so powerful what you're sharing. I have a feeling that throughout the course of the conversation, I'm going to feel quite emotional, which I'm going to trust is all as it's meant to be, because there's something so tender and touching and important about what you're describing. You had me thinking about one thing in this description of life is doing me according to a God-guided destiny or trajectory or plan. And so the offering, the opportunity, the task for all of us is the way that my mind is translating it. Can I get out of the way? Can I be with it? Can I move with it? Can I keep returning back to, I guess, what we would call in the Western world center, but actually what you and I are describing is that space of inner, that space of home where all of the separating forces, all of the sense of boundaries, all of the sense of individual me dissolves into this deeper, wider consciousness in which there is both everything and there is nothing. That's my experience when I'm in meditation. I don't struggle to approach it as a practice, nor do I struggle to stay in it, because there is a quiet that is so tantalizing and rich that it feels to me like an arrival point. It feels as though, oh, if this was experience, if this is lived experience, gosh, this is beautiful. There's no perception of danger. There's no perception of expectation. There is, as you say, nothing that I need to do from the often fearful me, even as much as I have so much, I've made so many gains from that mentality, which was very much my lived experience. It was one of suffering and fear and entanglement, and it was still being wrapped up in an illusion, but it wasn't a very fun one. So now the experience that I have on a day-to-day basis is very different. But if you were to still contrast my external lived experience and the state that comes when I move into this space that we're describing, it has an alkaline quality to it. It's like a balm. And in that balmy place is also for me, the intuitive sense of, okay, where is life moving me next? And my trajectory into all of this actually initially was 12-step. And in 12-step, one of the prayers that you're given right at the beginning is, God, what would you have me do? And you say it every morning. In any context, should I stay with this partner? God, what would you have me do? Am I to be here today? Very much kept to the 24 hours that you're living in this lived present moment. And even 24 hours now is quite an expanse. But that capacity to hand over, trusting that the outcome of handing over would be not necessarily something that felt benevolent, but would have a rightness, in the passage of time, would have an alignment, a fit, and that if it was challenging, I would be able to navigate that. Presumably, because also how we navigate challenge is by not getting too attached to it. In your description of the suffering, there's also something there about how we encounter without resistance, as you say, the moments of pain or the moments of confrontation, or perhaps they are only painful because they are causing friction with the identified self. Is that your perspective? What would be your take on that?
Yes, it is. Yeah, basically, we are so conditioned to, I mean, it's natural that all of us are programmed towards our own fulfillment and happiness. But we haven't really read the small print when we arrived here in the contract of being human. And in that small print, it warns you are entering a place of duality. And the benefit of this place of duality is that it is made up of interconnected polar opposites that allow you the capacity to see see and to experience, even if it may in the end be an appearance, a dream state. But the experience of being human is that powerful and that precious. So this is the only place that any human being can move towards the integration of whatever is not settled within her body-mind organism. And at that point, I would also like to point out that when I say Anthea's body-mind organism, I'm talking of this Anthea that I'm seeing before me now. And from my perspective, this Anthea has never existed before and will never exist again. However, this Anthea is made up of elements of genetic material that may indeed have existed before in different body minds and have come together to make this unique creation of God called Anthea. And another opportunity is given on the widest level, on the level of consciousness, to be able to integrate these energies. And as those energies are integrated, the witnessing takes place on an individual level for Anthea and on the larger level of God or consciousness.
As you were talking, I had a moment where I was suddenly aware that when one is there, wherever the projected point is that we are efforting and trying to get to, it will be no different from being here. The idea, the illusion is, obviously very commonly stated, when I'm there, I will be happy. When I'm there, I will feel fulfillment. And if we're taking what you're saying as the small print, it won't be any different. Ultimately, it will just be me living in that space, evolved in that shape, at that point, with still the same question in front of her, which is it worth now closing your eyes and moving inward? We spend so much of our lives on this forward trajectory. Let's make it better and bigger and better and bigger, especially people that are goal-oriented. There are a huge number of those that listen to the podcast. I suppose I'm taken back to that statement that you offered to my PA, which was, I live a simple life. There was a feeling as I read that statement of enoughness. There's nowhere that you're trying to get, nothing that you're trying to get to externally.
Who would be there to try and get it? That's the issue that everyone sees in the end, if it's their destiny. There really isn't this. If you look at the experience of your life, if anyone looks at the experience of your life, Anthea, every 24 hours, she disappears completely. And along with her disappearance, the world goes with her. So every person in deep sleep, from their own experience, it is so important to emphasize that this teaching is really a verifiable teaching when you bring it back to your own experience. You don't need to believe anyone. You just need to inquire. You just need to check it out. So the fact is that all of us, every 24 hours, assuming we have a reasonable sleep pattern, disappear in deep sleep. And along with that, all of the narrative of this personal doer, all of the narrative of this separate person, all of the narrative of this ego structure is gone, completely gone. Not like a little bit is left. It is wiped away. And that's the restorative nature of deep sleep, that we go back into that place we emerged from, which is fundamentally restores our energetic levels to come back the next day and meet another day without feeling terrible. So if you really acknowledge that, and if you also see that whatever we call reality its quality is that it's always there. Reality is that which doesn't change. So if you disappear every 24 hours, it's not a big leap to begin to understand that this separate personhood, this narrative of ego structure, isn't real. It's a belief. And if you watch when you wake up, there's sometimes, it's different with each individual person, but sometimes when you open your eyes and you're coming from that space, you open your eyes and for a second or many seconds, you know nothing except one thing. I am. You have a sense of existing, but with no narrative whatsoever. And when you first notice that space, it can freak you out because it feels like, oh God, who am I? You know, I've got to reassemble myself. And then, of course, you do, but it's possible if you become interested in the secrets that that particular experience, again, very common experience for human beings, if you become interested in the secrets that it holds, it's possible to play a trick with it and to extend it for as long as possible. You won't necessarily get very far, but in extending it, you will be familiarizing yourself for the one truth of this manifestation. And that truth is I am. And that truth is consciousness.
And so then presumably the task is when we notice that we've moved extensively into the way of doing, and the identified self is how can I bring myself back? Like you're talking about extending the window, is having, I presume having, for example, a morning and evening meditation practice or having a regular mindfulness discipline, it's can I have a regular way of creating that disappearance?
Okay, this is the hard part for spiritual seeking. Because the truth is, Anthea, if you understand that you're not the doer, then you can't avoid the logic, which is there's nothing you can do. And when you really see that and feel that for the first time, it can be very painful. It can provoke feelings of despair after maybe years of struggling to find some sort of peace and happiness and joy and fulfillment, sincerely struggling and doing all of the things you've done. And suddenly you come closer to understanding when you examine how your actions take place and find the source of each one of them, you start to understand that you had no control over that. Things just happened. And so, one of the most poignant phases of most seekers' journey is when they realize that there's nothing they can do. So, the question that comes next, the paradoxical question that comes next is, I understand there's nothing I can do, but what can I do? It's natural that still the mind doesn't want to accept that helplessness, doesn't want to accept that surrender. What guarantee are you giving the mind that that surrender, that let go, that acceptance will produce any results? Well, there's none you can give. So it's painful. It can be painful, and it can be a place of despair. But on the other side of it is the good news. And the good news is that anyone listening today to your podcast can take heart from the fact that really, in the way that life is being lived, they are interested and drawn towards naturally these subjects. So there isn't any need to throw your hands up and go, well, what's the point? I'm going to end it all now. Because if you really look at your life, you will see that you've been drawn to this particular destined part of a human being's interest or focus, and it's rare. Not many people are drawn to this level of self-inquiry because it doesn't pay, it doesn't provide status, it doesn't provide wealth, it doesn't provide fame, it doesn't provide all of the things that the world promises you when you are the doer, when you try your hardest to be the doer. But what it does give you is a sense of peace, of relaxation, and within every religion, all of the religions, they essentially mirror what happened to Jesus on the cross on that. I can't remember what night it was, maybe the second night, where he's racked in pain and he's screaming, God, why hast thou forsaken me? And suddenly the understanding takes place and he goes, thy will be done. And in Islam, it's inshallah, God willing. In the Hindu religion, it's thou art the doer, thou art the experiencer. This space, this understanding that is the doorway to becoming free. This understanding of acceptance, of let go, is the basis of every single one of the organized religions. Buddha's Ramesh Balsika would like to quote a statement attributed to Buddha where he said, events happen, deeds are done, but there is no individual doer thereof. So this is the space that allows something else to drop and occupy your consciousness. And unfortunately, because of our conditioning, in many cases, it can be a painful and difficult process to get to that space because it's very difficult for the mind, trained as it was from its early days to protect you, to discover the trust and the let go with nothing on the table that it can hang on to allow that space to happen.
I can hear what you're describing as far as that it could feel as though that means things are futile. And certainly the argument would be from what you're saying, well, the efforted doing coming from the individuated self is sort of futile because really all it actually creates is more of me and more of the me separated suffering me. And it's built on rocky foundations because it's built on the want that I have that I think will bring me to the feeling that somewhere inside of me, I sort of think I know is possible for me to achieve or get to, and it won't come through that means. Interestingly, I don't hear it as futile, but I do hear it as a potentially fear-inducing reality that as we surrender to life's guidance, to life's path, there is no guarantee of what that experience will be like for the me. And if it is sort of preordained, or if literally if it's a current that is coming before me and taking me with it, it goes back to that point about being able to be with all of experience, which ultimately would allow one to evolve through into a different relationship with fear. Because if I'm saying that I get to surrender and I get to be led, but I don't get to choose necessarily what that is like, it's just within my path, then I have to stop avoiding or rejecting the negative experiences. And avoiding and rejecting them, for me, always feels as though it's rooted in fear.
For me, fear is based on, well, fundamentally, fear is based on the knowledge that we die. So we know that this particular identification with this particular body mind is not forever. But above that, what fear is based on is a sense that you don't belong. It's a sense that there isn't anyone taking care of you. And so you need to pick up that burden for yourself. And what the understanding brings through experience, as you begin to move at your own pace into different levels and layers of acceptance and let go, the observation that you bring to what takes place for you when those spaces are available forms a virtuous circle. And basically, you start to build up from your own experience, again, not needing anyone else. You start to trust that this is working in some way. This is something I don't need to be so anxious around. And what I always suggest is, you can play with this. I mean, we're now back, of course, to the doer and the paradox of that. But as long as that paradox is there, then this is something that you, the doer, can play with, because playing with it can easily allow you a bigger sense of space, a bigger sense of freedom. And so without picking something that is going to be life-changing if it doesn't happen the way you think it should, don't be silly about it. Start with something more playful than that. Start with maybe when you walk to work or when you go to the shops or whatever, you follow one route. And so one day you think, actually, let's go another route. Let's start doing things differently. And you may have seen on that link I gave you, but the picture on the top was actually a wooden sign, a picture from Ramesh's wall, which is two arrows pointing this way and that way. And in the middle says this way. And that, in a way, is an image that maybe gives you the sense of playfulness, that you can go anywhere you want. Just be aware with where you go and see what happens. Because the difficulty around these things that we all feel around desire and fear is that we think we're still in control. And so the only way we can plan is by delving into our past and looking at what worked before that gave us the most pleasure and what didn't work before and gave us the most pain. That's the only template we have from this false perspective of separation of a separate person with personal doership. The only place that we can involve our doership with trying to control our future. But a casual look at that, you can see the cost of it. Because inevitably, by doing that often enough, you start leading a life of repetition. And not only that, but there is never any guarantee that something that worked before will work again. All of us know from our own experience that results are never in our hands. So not only are you repeating something, but there's still no guarantee that it's going to give you what it did last time. So it's stupid. It's self-defeating. It's not worth your energy and trouble. So the playfulness I suggest around this is in the simple aspects of your life. See if there's ways that playfully come up which allow you to reconnect with the unknown, allow you to reconnect with mystery, with wonder, with what isn't familiar. Not, as I say, in a dangerous way. I never recommend that, but in a playful way. So that in that experience, you may start to see the energy that allowing that newness brings to the living of your life.
One of the things that I teach students about, because my work orients around body and mind and the integration of the two, is our neural capacity for newness, and also the way that the mind will habitually go back to what it thinks it knows, and how comforting of a state that is cognitively, and how we seek to repeatedly reinforce the things that we believe that we know. And particularly in the students I teach a lot of therapists and coaches, and we seek together in that shared space of the training to come to a greater quality of beingness. I use the word embodiedness, it's just the word that we use, but this state is very much what you've been describing. And we talk a lot about when you're working with others, when you're supporting others, how do you support them in allowing possibility? And where is it useful to be watchful that in remembering the past, they aren't recreating the future? So I'm smiling as I listen to you, because although we're speaking from very different pulpits, we're talking fundamentally about the same thing. There's something you mentioned before that I'd love to just tease out based on your worldview, which is that you said that it's rare. The spiritual journeyer, the spiritual seeker, it's not necessarily how everyone comes out of the oven. One of the questions I had earlier was sort of around societal growth and societal evolution, and I'm noticing a curiosity in your perspective of that. Give me your take on both the uniqueness of this path and also how we interact with the bigger questions around the world trajectory.
Okay, so I think let's start with my general understanding of where we find ourselves. So we have found ourselves in this manifestation, which, as I said before, is made up of interconnected polar opposites and allows us the ability to experience and to see, to feel joy and to feel pain, to feel suffering, all of it. And from my perspective, every single human being's activity at its very core is about the same thing. And that is, to use your name of your podcast, that is the essential engine room in each human being, because all of us have experienced the same thing. We emerge from oneness into duality. And that imprint, that sense of belonging, that sense of somewhere else we know, is there for everyone. Now, according to destiny, there are all sorts of activities that take place within a human being's life. And all of them are valid, all of them are beautiful, all of them can contribute to this wonderful expression of consciousness that we have here, this, what the Indians call this lila, this play. And so there isn't a hierarchy in this sense. There is simply different roles. There are different vehicles through which God experiences him or herself. So within this vast array of 8 billion, and I'm just talking human beings, experiences of being alive in this manifestation, there are very few that are destined to inquire inside themselves. And I don't think I'm going to remember this quote exactly, but it's said by Krishna in the Mahabharata. And he said, of the 1,000 who are interested in me, there is only one who goes deeper. And of the 1,000 that go deeper, there's only one that understands. Now, that seems like a very bad average. And it's like that. It's like that. It's just destiny. And one shouldn't, it doesn't require you to spend that much time on it. I mean, I'll tell you this story that happened to me when I first met Ramesh. I was there 3 days in 2000, and I was the last. There were three questions. I was the last questioner, and I asked him two questions. One was about reincarnation, and the next question was this. And I said, Ramesh, I've listened to your concept. I understand it. There's no free will. I'm not the doer. But please answer this question. What if I cannot find inside myself the acceptance of my non-acceptance of your concept? What if I can't find the acceptance that I'm not accepting your concept? And he looked at me with great compassion and he said, then you will have to go along with the suffering that is part of that non-acceptance. And at that moment, I felt like I'd been split in two, and I started to sob uncontrollably. And the split contained two parts. And on the one hand, I realized in that moment I'd fallen to a ground from which there was no more falling. I'd found a place where I could rest. But simultaneous to that, I had to acknowledge that all of the energy that I'd given to my spiritual seeking might never come to fruition. And the contrast of those two experiences was very, very painful for me. All I can say to people is look and see what you're drawn to. As I say, if you're listening to your podcast, this is an indication of what you're drawn to. Don't be worried about how your life is unfolding. Just try and get out of your own way. And the way you can do that is by seeing the falsity of this idea of separation. And I always recommend a space of silence and stillness as a beautiful doorway into that space of understanding. But Ramesh had his own particular thing, and he said, you know, at the end of he was very focused on people living ordinary lives, working lives, as you said, many people in urban lives. And he said, look, at the end of a day, you've worked, you come back home, and if you have half an hour, just you can sit down quietly with a cup of tea, or if you like a whiskey, you can have a whiskey, and you just close your eyes and you take an action from your day that you would bet your whole bank balance on that was your action, that no one could convince you that that wasn't something you chose of your own free will. And then go back and examine slowly, carefully, how that action took place. And if you do it sincerely and honestly and thoroughly, each time I can guarantee you will find that the cause of that action had nothing to do with your control whatsoever. His point was if you do that often enough, at a certain point, there will be maybe a flash of understanding where you go, oh my God, that's actually true. I can verify that from my own experience. And then a process starts to take place that does require a period of time that reassembles the habits and the conditioning that you built up over the years.
Yeah, and ultimately, I guess what that allows people is they really learn to feel safe in the surrender. They really learn to feel safe in the not knowing. Ultimately, if that is within your path. Even as I say that sentence, I can feel the impact that that would have. You've spoken so beautifully, and I had so many other questions. And actually, in this moment, all of them have dissolved, which is really wonderful. I wonder if there is anything left here that you feel called to share as life moves through you in this moment.
Yeah, I mean, I think you maybe remember this from the small book of talks I gave before meditation, but the only thing that I care about is freedom. That's the only thing that I am interested in. Obviously, my own, and then whoever comes across my path. And so it appears that the role of this particular body mind is to see if it can inspire and encourage and bring support so that people feel comfortable in going into places that, by definition, are challenging. The first time that you acknowledge that you have no free will, the question comes up, if I don't have any free will, who the hell am I? What does it all mean? It shoots at the very core of your being. And so this path, generally speaking, this path of spiritual seeking, and that sounds very highfalutin when I say that. What I'm really saying is the person or the being you love the most in this life is you. Beyond your children, beyond your parents, beyond your lovers, they all require you. When you go to sleep, they're gone. You are the center of your universe. And I don't mean that in any selfish way. It's simply factual. Look where you go and the world goes in deep sleep. So you love this body mind the most. So if you can orientate yourself towards a level of care and attention and awareness around not just necessarily your physical form and your health and well-being in that sense, but your interiority, your inner world. And that's why for me meditation is so useful. Stillness is so useful. Silence is so useful. Every day, doesn't matter for how long, but just to start to incorporate a space that is just for you. And then, I always use the words that Buddha is supposed to have said to his disciples as a kind of final act of encouragement, which is chariveti, chariveti. And it means keep going, keep going. That's it. And you can't miss your destiny. It's no one has. So just continue. And the more you do, I think you will start to observe what the Taoists call wu wei, this non-active action. You start to observe your body mind entering into a space of action that is non-volitional, that is happening, that is spontaneous, that is simply a response to whatever the context is that you are surrounded by. And again, that experience is so deeply relaxing and encourages and supports this feeling of trust and acceptance building in your let go. So just keep going.
Yeah, I love this. What a beautiful thing to end on. And listeners, I hope that you gain as much from that as I have. What we will do is make sure that you know how to access more of Tribo's wisdoms, his learnings, his teachings. If you have deep, deep, desirous questions, then please send them through to us at the usual email address. We'll put it in the show notes. Mutribo, thank you so much for your time. I very much look forward to learning more from you, but for now, that was such a beautiful morsel. I'm very grateful.